E agora vamos chamar nosso primeiro convidado internacional, diretamente da Nova Zelândia, Jonathon Hannon. Ele vai falar sobre o fenômeno do lixo zero para o futuro das cidades. Ele é coordenador do Zero Waste Academy, na Nova Zelândia, e envolve, nessa academia, ensino, pesquisa, consultoria, assessoria à indústria, comunidade. E ele também é doutorando, né? Está estudando metodologias municipais de lixo zero. Jonathon, você já está aí, se apresenta e diz para a gente um pouquinho do que você faz.
Hi everybody, my name is Jonathon Hannon. I'm coming to you from Massey University in New Zealand. I'm the coordinator of the Zero Waste Academy here. I'd like to say hi to my friends and colleagues in Brazil and say thank you very much for enabling me to be part of the Zero Waste Cities International Congress. I have prepared a short presentation based around 4 questions that were sent to me. So hopefully this will come together okay, and what I would say is my email address is in this first slide. If anyone would like a copy of the presentation or would like to make contact with me afterwards, please feel free to do that. Hopefully, if you have any questions, I can perhaps clarify that via email or by Skype or Zoom or something. Anyway, so the first question related to the continuity and what happened with New Zealand's zero waste strategy entitled Towards Sustainable New Zealand, and you'll see that that was New Zealand's waste strategy in 2002. So we're talking about 2 decades, 20 years ago, nearly, just about. And the first point to make is that the Zero Waste New Zealand Trust ran a very important and powerful zero waste campaign that was supported by another program by the Waste Management called the Life After Waste program, which integrated the rhetoric and language of circular and Business Council in New Zealand also. So this was a very powerful grassroots movement and a groundswell of change, and it's fair to say that it was very successful. And so at around this point in 2002, it was cited that 70% of local government or local councils in New Zealand had signed up to. So that gives you an idea of how well accepted the concept of zero waste was. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of what's happened since then, because this first period around the New Zealand waste strategy of 2002 was obviously a very positive time for zero waste. And then what happened is we had a change of government, and I know my friends and colleagues in Brazil will understand the change of government and the pendulum swing between left and right wing ideologies. So in 2009 we had a change of government to actually a very anti-sustainability, anti-zero waste government, and they developed a new New Zealand waste strategy of 2010, and they drew on some business critique about zero waste. And these 2 points on my PowerPoint presentation here are citations from a report funded by vested interest business lobby groups, and they interpreted zero waste as moving into an activist phase, and they argued that the economics of waste was out of kilter and needed to be changed. And they argued that it was important to replace references to resource use efficiency, i.e. environmental perspective, to economic efficiency as being higher and more important. And they argued that it was important to remove all reference towards zero waste from documents expounding serious waste policy. So this was a very flagrant criticism of zero waste. And now when we look at what happened, this is this period of change between governments, between the positive view of zero waste and then this very negative view of zero waste, which literally removed zero waste from waste policy at that point. And you can see that in the zero waste period of time, before the change of government around 2010 and the change of waste strategy, waste was going down. And then immediately when zero waste strategy was undermined and rejected, we see New Zealand's waste to landfill going back up. And this point here on the left-hand side is from a Ministry for the Environment document, which talks about how New Zealand now has one of the highest per person waste generations at 334 kilograms per person, and between 2014 and 2017, the waste exposed to landfill went up by 21, just over 20%. So you can see the impact of rejecting zero waste is quite simply waste to landfill, and the generation of waste goes through the roof. As part of my PhD, I looked at this phenomena, and I began with my literature review looking at the critique of zero waste, what had given rise to this very negative view about zero waste. And what I discovered was a whole raft of critique, which from a zero waste point of view, I felt was not justified. And some of it was actually really poor quality reasoning. Some of it was very, very extreme. And actually said there's no such thing as zero waste. It's an idea without a plan. And so I examined that in the course of my research, in particular this first point of critique, or this the critique that zero waste was doomed for failure. And through my publications and my research, I've come to the complete opposite conclusion, that actually zero waste is successful, it's scientific, it's learning and evolving, it's controversial and challenging the status quo, it's measurable, it's socially and culturally beneficial, and actually it's a good economic investment. So on one hand, you have a raft of critique that was used to undermine zero waste around the time when New Zealand's waste policy changed from zero waste to anti-zero waste, and much of it I think is arguably completely wrong. So so this is the next question, question 2, and it talks about the relationship between zero waste strategy and innovation. So I think before we talk about that, we need to understand what zero waste is. And zero waste began in a commercial and industrial context and was very, very successful. But in that framing, there was a whole raft of interpretations about what zero waste was. There's also clearly a very strong activist community dimension of zero waste, campaigning against the social justice issues of waste and using the power of no and confrontation to challenge the conventional thinking around waste. And also the zero waste lifestyle and household basis is part of this, and that's a very, very positive and very challenging thing. And then of course zero waste has morphed and moved into the municipal, council, regional, national setting, and you can see New Zealand is an example of that, with a national, in 2002, a national waste strategy with entitled Towards Zero Waste and Sustainability. Now, if you look at across the spectrum, in a business context, you control what comes into your business and what happens in your business and what goes out. And within a municipal dimension, the same thing does not apply. Councils do not literally control everything that happens inside their jurisdiction. So what we realize is that municipal dimension of zero waste is a lot more complex and is actually quite different, I think, the mechanics of zero waste in a municipal context. However, the municipal context is also where perhaps arguably the most impact of zero waste can be felt. It's also important to recognise the role right across the spectrum of challenging the fundamental throwaway society and the default mechanism to burning and burying waste, and in particular the role of waste to energy. So within my research, I've really, I guess, explored the relationship between zero waste as a catalyst, provoking innovation, seeking new ideas, and seeking to break the impasse and the issues around waste and to create a new future. So this is just a summary of the publication Moving Towards Zero Waste Cities, a nexus, and talking about the nexus for international zero waste academic collaboration. So you see, I would argue that inherently zero waste is hyper aspirational. It's talking about a second green industrial revolution, etc. So this is another set of writing based on the publication Future Cities, Exploring the Phenomena of Zero Waste, which I worked with my co-author Atiq Zaman. And I talk about that zero waste is a creative milieu and a place where innovation in future focus is being generated. So I would argue very strongly that zero waste is all about innovation. And you can see from my publications that I believe that's a very strong argument to make, that zero waste is all about innovation, about change, about breaking through barriers, about disruption, transgression, and creating new pathways forward to address what is now recognized as a global human health and environmental crisis related to waste issues. So, question 3, solid waste management in cities. I would argue and agree with this is one of the most important municipal services, and inevitably all urban systems are interrelated, i.e. transport, energy, housing and food security. And the question is effective and sustainable waste management a key prerequisite to enable sustainable cities? So I think perhaps one of the best ways to understand this is through an industrial ecology perspective. And this diagram, I think, is really helpful, especially when we understand the anthroposphere as being integrated with atmosphere, hydrosphere, geosphere, and the biosphere. And then we understand and interpret the anthroposphere as being a city, which is interactive and emitting into all of these dimensions. And so I would argue that zero waste is part of a post-waste movement. It's a wide movement, and it recognises the positive energy, water, greenhouse gas emissions, chemical pollution, and socio-cultural and economic implications in respect of conserving and cycling resource flows, mitigating climate change, and transitioning into more sustainable development and the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So certainly I would argue that sustainable waste management and zero waste, I think, is the most progressive and assertive way of achieving sustainable waste management, is a prerequisite towards us achieving sustainable cities. So in terms of my own work practice and the practice of the Zero Waste Academy here at Massey University, we aim to, or I aim through research supervision and through my interrelationship within the university sector and our host relationship with our city, which is Palmerston North here in New Zealand. This is from the publication Towards Zero Waste Cities, and I see zero waste as very much integrated with a circular economy, bioeconomy worldview, integrated with circular integrated waste management and the discourse around that, and then integrated and interrelated with industrial ecology and symbiosis and urban metabolism studies. So I see zero waste as integrated with all of those things. And in terms of one of the research theories I draw on in terms of my outworking of my research practice and my teaching practice is the concept of living labs. And living labs are essentially about drawing on real-world contexts to drive student learning. So these are some comments about living labs from various writers. In terms of the background, living labs has played a role in the development of ICT and the co-design and validation of new technology and products. And living labs is talked about being ideas factories. And so I in essence operate the Zero Waste Academy as a living lab and a particular design of living lab working in the space of waste and zero waste management. And so there's quite a lot of literature around the concept of a living lab within a sustainable campus environment, and there's a lot of activity around that globally, and I think there's enormous potential for that. And then other dimensions around where living labs is a flexible concept that can be practiced in a whole range of different contexts, not just zero waste. But I think there's a really great opportunity in terms of framing the Zero Waste Academy as a living lab in relationship and exploiting the relationship between the university and the city, and enabling students to integrate with this plethora of real-world problems to find pathways to solve problems and to suggest new ideas and to do work to enable decision makers within the university and within cities and nation states and regions to be able to progress some of their work. So I certainly argue that this is a really powerful opportunity, and I'd just like to explore that by talking about a project which is I've worked with and colleagues from Brazil, and this is a slide from the river, one of the rivers or streams that flow into the river in our city, in the Manawatu River in Palmerston North. And we began a project looking at plastic pollution challenge. This is my son Wilson when he's about 11 years old, and we had a wonderful young woman, Lace, from Brazil, came over and was part of the Palme Plastic Pollution Challenge project, and we're now just finishing the second year project. So we began understanding plastic pollution and then began working with our community to address plastic pollution. So this is an example of a project area that integrates within Massey's teaching program, and this is my colleague Karen Hitton. You can see Lace there, and this is some of the research. Lace was very, very helpful and clever in helping us illustrate the citizen science-based project work that we did. And you can see that this project is all about people. It's all about working with school children to understand the problem of plastic pollution and then turn that knowledge, turn that citizen science into action, working with businesses and the local council and regional council in our community. So here we get to question 4. Discuss the reconceptualization of conventional waste management, i.e. recycling versus, this bigger picture of a zero waste strategy. And can zero waste change the way we understand objects and materials and what we call waste? So the starting point for, I think, addressing that question is to understand or look at the definition of waste. And this is one definition here. Solid waste are all wastes arising from human and animal activities, normally solid and are discarded as useless or wanted. But because of their intrinsic properties, discarded waste materials are often reusable and may be considered a resource in another setting. So this is a very conventional definition of waste. This book is 1993. It's a book about solid waste management, environmental management. So this is very much a conventional view of what waste is, and even in that conventional view, you can recognize the resource value. And of course, zero waste takes the view that all waste flows should be viewed as resources. So I would certainly argue that the distinction between something being a waste or a resource is an entirely subjective human value judgment, and this designation is based on socially constructed individual and collective perceptions such as around hygiene, perceived and actual value, ethical norms, infrastructure, technology, time, location, monitoring, compliance. And so essentially, if we choose to view stuff as waste, it will be waste. If we choose to view it as resources and treat it as resources, we can. This is essentially a design socio-economic design.
Muito obrigado, Jonathon. Que incrível esse trabalho, hein? Realmente, novas perspectivas, novas ideias, iniciativas e inovação.